Sometimes love doesn't hold your hand, it lets it go. And that's one of the hardest things to understand when you're in the middle of losing someone you thought would never leave. We're conditioned to believe that love is all about presence, about showing up, staying close, standing firm when things get tough. But what if real love sure, self-aware, deeply rooted love knows when to step back? What if, for someone who truly loves you, absence is not avoidance, but an act of respect? It's counterintuitive. When someone leaves, we assume they didn't care enough to stay, that if they loved us, they would have fought harder, and sometimes that's true, but not always, because love, when it's honest, also knows its own limitations. It recognizes when it's not strong enough, not healthy enough, not ready enough to be what the other person needs. And in that rare, painful moment of clarity, love can look like walking away, not because it doesn't care, but because it does. Imagine a man who sees everything you are, your worth, your strength, your heart, and realizes that he's not in a place to hold it all with care. He could stay, pretend, make promises he hopes he can keep. But deep down, he knows the truth. Staying would only delay the inevitable. Staying would mean slowly eroding your confidence as he fails to meet you at the level you're living on. So he chooses the path that feels like a dagger to both of you. He leaves. Not to hurt you, but to avoid hurting you more. When someone disappears, our ego screams that we weren't good enough, that we were too much, too emotional, too demanding, but often it's not that you were too much. It's that he was too little. He couldn't rise to meet the depth of what you were willing to give, and instead of dragging you into a half-love, a relationship where you carry both hearts and all the weight, he quietly exits. Because in his silence, he's saying what he can't say out loud. I care too much to ruin you with my confusion. Of course, it doesn't feel like love in the moment. It feels like abandonment, rejection, like you misjudged everything. But the absence doesn't erase the connection that once was. It simply acknowledges that connection isn't enough to build something lasting when one person is still battling their own chaos. Love, in its highest form, doesn't just ask, "Do I want to be with you?" It asks, "Am I ready to love you in a way that protects, supports, and builds with you?" If the answer is no, then disappearing might be the only honest response. That doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean he handled it well. But sometimes the man who disappears is the one who, for a fleeting moment, saw you for everything you are, and knew he couldn't give you the future you deserve. And while that doesn't take away the pain, it should shift the narrative you tell yourself. He didn't leave because you weren't lovable. He left because you were too lovable to be loved half-heartedly. So yes, love doesn't always show up at your door with flowers and apologies. Sometimes it leaves without warning, and in the stillness that follows, in the space he no longer fills, you discover a different kind of truth, one where love's absence isn't a punishment. It's a permission slip to wait for someone who not only stays, but shows up in every way that matters. Not every man who walks away does so because he stopped caring. Some walk away because they care more than they know how to handle. They see the purity of your heart, the sincerity in your intentions, and they realize they're not built to receive that kind of love, not yet. So instead of destroying it slowly with their inconsistency, their unhealed wounds, their emotional confusion, they step back. Because staying would mean exposing you to the storm they haven't learned to control. We often assume that if someone truly loved us, they'd stay and fight. They'd face the discomfort, they'd grow beside us. And while that's the ideal, not everyone has the tools or emotional maturity to do that. Some people are still running from their own demons, still haunted by past mistakes, still terrified of real intimacy. For them, love isn't a safe place, it's a mirror, and when they see themselves reflected in your patience, your honesty, your consistency, it overwhelms them because it shows them everything they're not yet ready to be. So they disappear, and not because you're too much, but because they feel like too little. They don't say this out loud, of course, most don't. They don't give you the grace of closure, the kindness of clarity. But their silence isn't always a cold shoulder. Sometimes it's a shield, a way of protecting you from the parts of them they haven't even begun to face. They know they'd hurt you, maybe not intentionally, but inevitably. So instead of giving you months of confusion, half promises, emotional distance, they give you absence, abrupt, unfair, and painful, but strangely their most honest offering. You may think if he cared, he would have said something. He would have explained, but vulnerability is a language many people haven't learned to speak. They weren't taught how to express fear without pushing people away. They weren't shown that honesty can coexist with love. So they vanish, thinking they're sparing you pain, when really they're only shifting the weight of that pain onto your shoulders. Still, in their own distorted way, it's an attempt to protect you. Because deep down they know that being near you without being ready for you is a kind of slow betrayal. It's not romantic, it's not ideal, but it is real. And realizing this doesn't mean you excuse the hurt. It means you stop making that hurt about your worth. You stop replaying every conversation, every moment, trying to find what you did wrong, because this wasn't about your wrongness. It was about his readiness. His limits, his fears. So no, disappearing doesn't always mean he didn't care. Sometimes it means he cared in the only way he knew how, by stepping back before his brokenness spilled into your peace. And that's not the love you deserve. But it is the lesson you were meant to learn, that sometimes the most confusing endings are actually quiet acts of protection, and they make room for something greater, someone capable of loving you without disappearing at the first sign of depth. Letting go isn't weak, it's not giving up. It's the highest form of self-awareness and, in some cases, the highest form of love. Because when someone knows deep down that they're not ready, that their life is unstable, that their heart is unsure, they also know that staying might just delay the inevitable and break you slowly over time. So they choose the hard thing, they choose absence over obligation, they choose honesty over pretending, and that choice, while it hurts like hell, might just be the most loving decision they ever made. Now, that doesn't mean you won't feel abandoned. You will. It doesn't mean it won't feel like rejection. It will. But in the quiet after he's gone, when the noise settles, you might start to see the truth for what it is. His exit wasn't always about you. It was about him recognizing his limits and choosing not to drag you through his storm. And while it would have been easier for your heart to hear those words instead of being left in the dark, the act of letting go wasn't silence. It was restraint. It was love choosing to do the harder thing rather than fake the easier one. The people who cling, who stay out of fear, who hold on while giving nothing of themselves, those are the ones who drain you slowly. You end up begging for attention, chasing their affection, living on emotional crumbs, and even though they stay, their presence is hollow. You feel lonelier with them than you ever did without them. But someone who lets go, really lets go, usually does it because they've looked at the situation honestly. They've looked at you honestly, and they've made peace with the fact that they can't meet you where you are. This isn't the fairy tale we grew up with. It's not the love that stays through thick and thin. It's the love that recognizes when it's not enough, when it's not working, when it's doing more harm than good. And instead of dragging things out until resentment builds and hearts rot from neglect, it lets go, not because it stopped feeling, but because it couldn't grow any further. You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to mourn what could have been. But don't mistake someone's exit for evidence that you were unlovable. Sometimes it's the very opposite. Sometimes it's because you were so lovable, so sincere, so deserving, that they knew they couldn't rise to meet that. So they let go, and while that doesn't ease the sting of their absence, it reframes the story you tell yourself. You weren't abandoned, you were released. And that release is what makes space for someone who won't just hold your hand, but will hold your heart with the care, the courage, and the commitment that real love truly requires. We think of love as this force that naturally brings people together and keeps them together. But real love demands growth, it demands presence, it demands maturity, and not everyone is ready to face that mirror. Loving someone like you, someone who's present, emotionally aware, and real, forces a man to look at his own depth or lack thereof. And that can be terrifying. When he sees the honesty in your eyes, when he hears the hope in your voice, when he feels the weight of your trust. It can awaken parts of him he's been avoiding for years. So when he disappears, it's not always an escape from you. Sometimes it's an escape from himself, from the parts of him that know he's not yet whole, not yet capable of standing beside someone like you. He's not running because you're broken. He's running because you're whole, and that wholeness exposes his own emptiness. And when he finally sees that, really sees it, the shame, the fear, the weight of what he can't offer becomes too much. So he disappears, silently, quickly, without giving you the decency of explanation. Because he's not just trying to avoid hurting you. He's trying to survive the truth of himself. It's painful, I know. Because you were ready, you showed up with your heart open, you gave him a safe space to be seen, and he responded by walking away. That's enough to make anyone question their worth. But his leaving doesn't mean you weren't enough. It means you were enough to awaken something in him he couldn't yet handle. You were the mirror, the standard, the wake-up call, and sometimes that's a role people don't stay for. Sometimes you're the chapter that shakes them awake, but not the one they're ready to keep reading. This doesn't make his absence noble, it doesn't erase the hurt, but it gives you a new lens, because instead of writing yourself into a narrative of failure, you get to reframe the story. You weren't abandoned because you weren't valuable. You were left because he had a choice: rise to meet you, or retreat into the comfort of who he was before you. And he chose the latter, not because you're forgettable, but because change is hard. Because growth is painful. Because becoming the man you needed would have required him to confront everything he's not. And that's a mountain not every man is willing to climb. So don't make his exit mean something it doesn't. Let it remind you of your strength. Let it affirm that you bring a level of truth and depth that not everyone is built to hold. And more than that, let it teach you to stop chasing those who wake up in your light, but choose to go back to sleep. Because the man who's meant for you won't disappear when he sees what loving you requires. He'll stay, he'll rise, he'll choose the discomfort of growth over the comfort of silence, not because it's easy, but because you're worth it. You've done the hard part already, you've grieved, you've questioned your worth, you've rebuilt parts of yourself he never even took the time to see, and now he's back, maybe with a text that says, "Hey, I've been thinking about you," or a message that casually drips nostalgia. It's not dramatic, it's not full of apology or depth, it's just enough to reopen the door, and part of you wants to swing it wide open, because you remember the good. You remember how it felt to be wanted, to feel seen, to have someone choose you, even briefly. But you have to ask yourself a much harder question. What is he really offering this time? And does it actually honor who I've become in his absence? Because if he's returning with real love, he won't come back empty. He won't come back with the same vague intentions, the same guarded heart, the same fear disguised as charm. If it's real this time, he'll show you. He won't just say the right things, he'll do the hard things. He'll bring clarity instead of confusion, he'll bring consistency instead of chaos, he'll meet you with vulnerability, not manipulation, he'll show you through his actions that this isn't just loneliness talking, it's growth. It's awareness, it's a man who finally realized that love isn't something you vanish from. It's something you fight for, but if it's not love, if it's just ego or boredom or guilt, you'll feel it. Deep down, you'll know. You'll sense the hesitation. You'll hear the excuses. You'll feel the absence hidden beneath his presence. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll realize that you're not where you were when he left. You've changed, you've grown, you've filled some of the space he left behind with your own light, and going back now, accepting less than you deserve, wouldn't be healing, it would be a setback dressed up as comfort. It's easy to romanticize the return, to call it fate or a second chance, but not all returns are sacred. Some are just old patterns trying to find new life, so pay attention, watch what he shows up with. Not just in his words, but in his effort, in his presence, in his consistency. If he's grown, you'll know. If it's love, it will feel peaceful, not panicked, safe, not stressful, certain, not confusing. But if it's silence wearing a mask, if it's emptiness hoping to be filled by your forgiveness, then you'll feel that too, and you'll finally be strong enough to choose yourself instead. Because you've earned more than a recycled version of someone who once walked away. You've earned love that stays, love that shows up, love that doesn't need to disappear to realize what it had. And whether he comes back or not, your worth was never defined by his absence. It's defined by how fiercely you learned to honor yourself in spite of it.